Augmented reality in the realm of architecture and design represents the next evolution of creation and communication of a product by transitioning us from a framed view of our design documentation to an enveloping event rooted in the human experience. Our next guest speaker is Aviad Almagor, the director of the Mixed Reality Program at Trimble, and he'll be joined by Alan Robles, associate and experienced designer at Gensler, to explore the opportunities on how AR is evolving the design practice. Please join me in welcoming Aviad and Alan to the stage.
Oh, great. Ready? Hello, everyone. My name is Aviad Almagor. I'm the director of the Mixed Reality Program at Trimble. And with me on stage is Alan Robles. Alan is working for Gensler. He is the associate and experienced designer. You want to sit or?
Sure.
Yeah. So yesterday I presented as part of the enterprise track how Trimble is utilizing mixed reality to serve industries such as mining and building and geospatial. And today I want to focus on architecture. Gensler and Trimble are collaborating and exploring ways to use mixed reality and to understand how mixed reality will impact the design and construction processes. And maybe even more important, how they will impact the design and build environment. And I would like to pass the control to Alan to introduce Gensler.
Good morning, everybody. A little bit about Gensler. We're a global architecture and design firm. We were founded in San Francisco. We're about 5,000 employees by now. Completely employee-owned, with offices, all over the world. Our office kind of expansion isn't part of a growth strategy. It's really more part of a service strategy that involves us going to the places that our clients are asking us to be based on what they need. So every office around the world has been started because there was a client that took us there, and there was a need that we needed to fulfill for this client. And so that gives you a little bit of context to the way that we grow. In one sense, we grow organically. But another part of our growth is around how we envision that new technologies and new advances in arts and science are going to affect our business. And that runs the gamut, from AR and VR all the way to deep learning and AI. That pretty much brings us to where we are now. I mean, the thing that we're talking about now is actual for us. It's more practical. The presentation that we saw before us, which was really cool, was talking about things that existed only in a virtual space. And where we engage AR and VR is in the place where they actually intersect in reality. And we leverage virtual reality and augmented reality within our design process practically.
So a bit of a background. Just one human lifetime ago, the digital world began. It's a kind of interesting environment where, at least at the beginning, kind of digital primordial soup, with few people working like puppeteers to access the data remotely, fairly distant from them, kind of manipulating bits and pieces to get the work done. Fairly quickly, abstractions were created, and we start to use agents to manage complex structures, compilers, operating systems, big data sets. It was the age of big machines in data centers. And then the desktop computers arrived, and the distance between us, the users, and the digital world shrank. Computing got personal. You're all familiar with the mobile revolution. We found ourselves pressing our faces against those small flat screens, searching for data, searching for experiences. Some users wanted to dive into these experiences and to be immersed in them. And virtual reality actually took them there, kind of allows them to cross the threshold and dive into this digital universe, be completely immersed, completely disconnected. But not for long. They need to socialize and to engage and to understand and learn about the environment around us, brought them back to the surface. And this time, the digital content crosses threshold, but to the other direction, embedded inside our physical environment, surrounding us in the real world, kind of providing us the experience without completely blocking our senses. This mixed reality environment provides a much better and improved way to experience and understand the world around us. We don't see it as a trend, we see it as a revolution, which will really impact almost any aspect of our life. So let's explore what it can be done, what it can be, how it will be the impact on architecture and design.
And so for us, it's those practical applications of mixed reality. And mixed reality, the difference being that that the augmented content is interacting with the environment around it, right? There's occlusion happening. There's an extreme application of context. When we look at these new tools, we have to start to think about how they impact our design process, rethink our design process. And we work in a lot of different areas of our business, from new buildings to existing buildings, which we call hackable because there are opportunities to make interventions to kind of update the function of something that's been there for a long time. Creative environments, and those can take many different types of iterations. And then, how all of those things enable us to create the places of the future. It's not just about the way that we're applying this technology in the design process, but it's also about the way that this technology could impact those places that we're designing and change them in the future. The trick for us is that we work in 3D. We've always worked in 3D. We model everything that we design, and everything exists in 3 dimensions in the computer. But when it comes to communicating our design product, we communicate in 2D because we have to generate documentation for permitting, and renderings are on paper or on a screen. They're 2-dimensional things. They're things that we can't traditionally, up until now, up until very recently, we couldn't experience. It's been this thing, it's been, that viewported experience. And the rectangle of the time has been anything from a stone tablet, to a piece of parchment, to a painting, to the sheet of vellum, to the screen. It's always been some sort of viewport that you look through. But with these new technologies, for us, they've allowed us in our design, both in our design process, in our creative process, and our practical processes of documentation. They've allowed us to take that rectangle and turn it on its side and turn it into a doorway to being able to experience those places in limited ways, in practical ways. This video is of us using Trimble Suite for SketchUp in HoloLens. And what you're seeing is a future construction improvement to an office overlaid onto the actual space where it's going to happen. And our ability to essentially interact with that future iteration of what the space is going to be in context, in real time, and collaboratively with other people also wearing these devices. What that does for us is, if you can imagine that we have what we call a core and shell space, a space that is, it hasn't been built out. It's an open floor within a high-rise building. That we can step into that space and turn on a device and load in the floor plan, the design for a new office, and then virtually walk that whole office, understanding what the adjacencies are, what's next to what, how big they are, what the ceiling heights are, how much light we're letting in, what the sight lines are, all those things that traditionally we'd only been able to communicate through renderings and through diagrams and plans with lines drawn on them. Now we're able to bring our design process and our clients into these spaces before anything's built. We can show them multiple options, never having to have driven a single nail, poured a footing, done anything. And this is fundamentally changing the vision of how we see our design practice evolving. It's making us change the way we think about the use of space. Because if we can do this within our design process, then this design process and these innovations, they're going to make their way out into kind of the everyday world, into the everyman world. And so how are those things going to change the spaces that people inhabit in the future? I mean, when we talk about realities, we're all going to be able to have our own individual reality. There is a future where I can come to work dressed as Batman, and I will see myself dressed as Batman, but nobody else will see me dressed as Batman, right? How is this going to extend beyond kind of that personal experience into the shared experience? How is that going to change the built environment, the office environment, right? If you no longer need to have a monitor on your desk, then how big is that desk going to be? If you no longer need to have a phone at your desk, because all of those things are going to converge into one device, what form is your workplace going to take? We need to look at it not just in the practical way of how we design, but look towards the future into how those things are going to evolve over time. How we see the city. This idea of hackable buildings. I mean, hackable building because it's an existing building. It was built to requirements of a specific time to have a performance, within specific parameters. But now, as those parameters have changed, how do we update them to address new work modes, to address new opportunities, to service a future? With the use of these technologies, we're not only evaluating the possibilities, but we're also formulating how those possibilities are going to express themselves. We look at a city from the top down a lot of times, and we look at it as, programmatically between living, dining, business, culture, entertainment, parks, and open spaces, all of these things occurring within a dynamic city. But we're also experimenting, or not experimenting, we're also putting into practice how those things can be changed, reorganized, and iterated in a different way, where we're creating vertical cities that satisfy every single one of those programmatic requirements, from those parks and open spaces, right, through the business, through the office, all the way to providing, their own power for the building and pulling it completely off the grid. These are all things that are part of a vision that includes AR and VR as part of the way it's developed and also part of the way that it's implemented. We recently opened the Shanghai Tower in Pudong, Shanghai, China. It is the second tallest building in the world, second to the Burj Dubai, but I believe it's the tallest occupiable space in the world. It's a vertical city. Right? It filters its own air. It does pretty much everything. And it's an expression of the vision of how we see architecture evolving. Not to say that everything is going to be vertical cities, but to say that we need to look at things contextual to not just their present, but the future as indicated by the way that things are moving.
Questions? To kind of show you the kind of process that we are running now, I was last week in Venice. I was invited to a student workshop, architectural student, and they presented their work in augmented reality and mixed reality. And those kids actually grew into this digital environment. And it was amazing to see how easy it was for them to capture and deeply understand the value of this technology, not just on the way that they will present the work, which is surely critical for them, but also on the way that the physical environment will be impacted by this technology. So for example, some of the work presented spaces without internal partitions. Why do we need those internal partitions anymore? Is the architect's job is to create those physical partitions, or maybe just to create experiences and allow those students or users to consume whatever experience they want? It will provide the flexibility to work in kind of a very small environment, but feel that you are in a big room. Who will control those virtual partitions? Who will control the transparency of those partitions? Is it me, or maybe the organization will decide that I have no right to decide that I'm in a private space? Other user will be able to decide for me. It's a huge impact on the built environment, which I believe we'll start to see in the next decade.
So, quick question. Can you say a little more about what you mean by hackable space? I think the statement sounds interesting, but I'd like to understand a little more of what you're thinking when you say that.
So hackable space addresses, or specifically around, how do you take an existing building and how do you update its use to, to address contemporary needs, right? And so a great example for us personally is our Los Angeles office. Our Los Angeles office was a building that sat vacant for almost 15 years. It was originally a bank. It had a two-story high ground floor and a second floor that was completely enclosed without windows, where high-density storage was employed. We went into that and we hung a second floor from the third floor, or from what was then the second floor. We added a floor. We opened up a skylight. We created circulation around the entire perimeter of it. And essentially, we hacked a brand new office into an existing building, right? So hackable refers to making large-scale interventions into spaces to change their function significantly. One of the things that I really want to touch on is this idea of the way that these technologies are evolving and kind of where it's pushing us. And I think the important conversation for us is, yes, about the tools, yes, about the way that it's going to change our work, the work that we do based on those new opportunities, the way that those new technologies are going to affect work modes and life modes. But then there's also this idea of our ability to directly address experience within our design product. One of the things that's a little bit tricky to communicate while you're designing is what the experience of being in these spaces is going to be like. And through the use of augmented reality and virtual reality, we're able to leverage to address experience directly as we're developing these spaces, to understand what ceiling heights and open spaces are going to feel like, rather than just looking at them through this view-ported experience. And our ability to address experience is really going to be what distinguishes us in the future from programs that are now able to compose original music, to replicate original works of art by master painters. There's nothing telling us that in the future, deep learning and AI won't be able to take a specific architect's style, the size, the statistical requirements of a project, the size of the lot, the code requirements, the green requirements, and compile all of those and spit out a complete set of documents ready to permit, if not already permitted. The thing that's going to keep us ahead of that kind of eventual change in our profession is our ability to address experience in our design product. Our pursuit of these technologies is directly pointed towards our ability to address experience, not just within the design process, but also in the end product. Because at this point, human beings are the only ones that are going to be able to address the human being's need for experience. Since that's a constantly moving target, influenced by so many things, that's where we need to focus our efforts in addressing and expanding our ability to engage experience within our design product.
Can you talk briefly to potential cost savings and your return on investment? You talk about envisioning the design well before you hammer a nail or cut a piece of wood or bend metal. It seems like there's potential reduction in rework and new requirements after the construction is started.
Yeah, there is, and we're experiencing that on a big scale right now because, so in a traditional design process, in retail, for instance, we're building a new store. And so a lot of times we will build an actual store out of foam core, the complete store, down to the product on the tables, down to the tables, down to everything. And so these technologies are letting us shorten that because there's no longer this foam core construction time. There's no longer all of these kind of extended review and extended generation of original assets. We're able to economize on that significantly. So we're able to economize in time, and we're also able to economize in resources. And so that lets us bring things to market a lot quicker.
Yeah. It goes beyond the design. If you will move to the construction stage and you can use mixed reality to visualize the work you should do, it will improve the efficiency and the quality of the work. And same on the facility management side, taking all this amount of information we already created and bring it to the desk of the facility management engineer, where you can visualize the data in context while doing the work is a great promise of this technology.
I'm
next. Sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hi, I just want to thank you for your presentation. It's really great and very visionary. I come from retail, so a bit of a legacy, old school person. And one of the questions I have is, with all these wonderful different iterations of keeping up, I'm just thinking of sustainability, of experience, and creating a new environment of engagement. Can you help me understand what the grays are? Because as we build out these perfect experiences comes with human flaws. And while you are iterating and thinking blue skies, what are those gray areas that you have to contend with? An example would be Uber and how they are creating this different model and the human experiences. Well, what does it mean for the driver? So that's just an example of like a gray area where the human emotion limits. So may it be privacy or whatnot. Like when you're constructing these visions, what are the gray areas that hit hard for you that you struggle with?
Well, we're running over a little bit right now. I would be happy to discuss those in person. I mean, for us, it's in addressing experience, especially in retail, it's a lot around, a product engagement and how do we optimize that product engagement and how can we possibly have a store that is empty to the human eye, right? But with the aid of a device is completely assorted with only the thing that you want to engage, right? The economies of not having to ship things to that store until they're needed, of centralizing those things. I mean, it's a really broad conversation I'd love to have offline.
All right.
Hi. You're using certain tools now. How would you challenge this community to improve on those tools? What would you like to have additional to what you have now?
Increase the field of view. Make them completely unconnected. Increase the computing power. Increase the battery life. Those are paramount to our ability to be able to leverage them. Not so much internally. Internally is one, as designers, we can live with umbilicals and, heavy equipment. But on our client side, it's a different animal. We want our clients to have the most seamless, enjoyable, and simple to engage experience with the least amount of compromises. And so from a technology standpoint, it's just going to be overcoming all of those things that are, snag points at the moment. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.